Hey gang, it's Squill, and it's been a long time coming, but we're finally here. Fionna and Cake has aired all 10 of its episodes, and we know everything there is to know about the series. That means it's time to discuss and analyze every episode of the series, and then maybe do a wrap-up video ranking them all and discussing the series as a whole, we'll see. But for now, let's just start with the first episode, Fionna Campbell. Spoilers for the entire series. Fionna Campbell opens up with an anime-inspired dream sequence depicting Fionna as a Sailor Moon-esque magical girl. I really love the soft watercolor backgrounds in the sequence, they're really pleasing to look at. I also find it interesting that while Fionna does dream about her world being magical, it doesn't really resemble the Fionna and Cake world we're familiar with from the original show. I just think that's a really interesting and bold decision, to show such little of what we've come to expect from Fionna and Cake episodes. Overall, the sequence is really fun and does a good job showing what Fionna wants out of her life. And it's contrasted beautifully by how mundane her reality is. Immediately after we get our intro sequence, and not gonna lie, it's probably my favorite scene in the whole episode. Fionna Campbell is the only episode to have its own unique intro sequence, and I think I actually prefer it over what we ended up getting, to be honest. I just love the juxtaposition of the soft poppy vocals and music, combined with the morbid lyrics. The song has been stuck in my head ever since that first trailer release back in July. At this point, Zuzu has written 3 songs for Adventure Time, and all of them are bangers. I hope she comes back for the next project. I also just think it's fun seeing what a day in Fiona's life is like. Despite not getting a single conscious line of dialogue yet, by the time the sequence is over, I already feel like I understand who Fionna is as a character. It does such a great job characterizing her. And speaking of Fionna, let's talk a bit about her, because I think this first episode does a great job getting us to care about Fionna as a character. Fionna was such a nothing character in the original show. Like, I can't really think of any distinguishing characteristics of her, aside from just being into adventuring, I guess. She wasn't really her own unique character, she just existed to be a gender-swapped version of Finn. No offense to any OG Fionna fans out there, it's not like I've ever disliked her as a character. I just can't help but wonder how many people like her for her actual personality, and not just her character design and voice, both of which are admittedly excellent, but still. But the fact that Fionna is such a blank slate in these episodes is ultimately kind of a good thing, as it means that, when making her the protagonist of her own show, the Adventure Time crew could basically take her character in any direction they wanted. And yeah, I love Fiona's portrayal in this show, I think she's great. I find her so relatable as a bored adult who wants more out of life. She feels unfulfilled and wants some actual excitement in her life. She's just like me, FR. I care about her now, and now I care. I also just love how selfish Fionna is in this series. She's always so detached and short with people, and I kinda love it. It's such a great way to set her apart from Finn, who, despite having the occasional selfish moment, in general always looked out for other people. And in general, I feel like we kinda need more jerky and impatient protagonists like Fionna. She's just so much fun. Helps make her a more well-rounded and relatable character. I don't really have as much to say about Cake so far, as in this episode, she's pretty much just a regular house cat. She's definitely cute, and I love all her little cat noises. I just won't have much to say about her until her titular episode. One of the funnest things about Fionna Campbell is just how many random character cameos there are, most of which taking place on the bus scene. This is the only episode that takes place from start to finish in Fiona's world, and as such, it probably has more cameos than any other episode. My favorite of which being what appears to be a female version of Fern. Considering the magical explanation for Fern's existence in the first place, I wonder how a realistic version of him was even created and what her relation to Fionna is. But speaking of the bus scene, this is where we're reacquainted with Marsha Lee, who's probably my favorite Fionna and Cake character besides Fionna herself. I love his new anarchist persona, and it's great that they brought Donald Glover back to voice him. Speaking of which, jumping ahead a little bit, I really like his song Tumbleweeds and Rattlesnakes, although it's a kind of a shame just how short it is and how it's his only song in the entire series. Probably just has something to do with Glover's agents, but still a bit of a bummer. Another interesting detail about Fiona's world is just how many connections there are to Simon, with the most obvious one being the Betty statue. But there's other details such as Cheers being the only thing on TV, as well as Cake being obsessed with ice. All of those Simon references add an air of mystery to this episode, and makes you wonder what's really going on with Fiona's world. But going back to the bus scene, it's here we meet Fiona's boss, Queenie. Despite being based on a really funny character, I never really thought much of Queen of Ooh in Fionna and Cake and Fionna, mostly because she only gets a few lines of dialogue in which she's not pretending to be a mummy. She doesn't get a ton of screen time in this episode, but still makes great use out of what little she does get. She also confirms the existence of Jesus in Fiona's world, so that's pretty epic. But that's a good segue into discussing the adult elements in Fionna and Cake. The original show already played with mature jokes and themes, so I was definitely curious as to how Fionna and Cake would handle its TV-14 rating. Really, it's just a few instances of nudity and mild swearing, along with some blood and alcohol consumption in later episodes. At most, some of these elements can feel slightly jarring at times, but none of them feel too out of place in Adventure Time. Really, it feels like Adventure Time could have just been like this the whole time and the show wouldn't be that different. Don't worry, this is not Adventure Time adult party cartoon. Instead, it's far more comparable to something like Season 5 of Samurai Jack. Really, the show only feels more adult because of the older and more mature characters we follow, and less because of anything superficial like blood or alcohol. Anyways, the next character we're introduced to is Gary, who's now a barista at a bakery. Gary is the first of a few characters in the series to have his voice replaced, and at first I wasn't that big a fan of the new voice actor. At first it was just a little too nasally for my liking, but I don't know, it's kinda grown on me. I mean, it definitely helps that he's not the exact same character here as he was in the original show. And even in the original show, his voice wasn't exactly consistent. I really enjoyed the new personality they gave Gary in this show, making him this dorky, aspiring baker. I think having him be into making sweets was a great way to tie his personality into PBs while still making him his own character. It's in the same scene we're introduced to Beatrice Butler, the human equivalent to Butterscotch Butler, the Butterscotch Scottish Butler. Her character was definitely the highlight of the otherwise mediocre 5 short tables, so I was happy to see her come back. Pretty funny how she continues the trend of versions of Peppermint Butler being portrayed as not a great person in Adventure Time spin-offs. Though it obviously works better here than in Wizard City, since she's not supposed to be the same pet that we're familiar with from the original show. Gary's reaction to the mouse choosing the classic pastry over his was really funny. Anyways, after that scene, we're introduced to Hunter, the human version of Huntress Wizard and the penultimate character Fionna meets in this episode. Pretty cool how we get to meet the humanized version of a character who didn't have a Fionna and Cake counterpart in the original show. Also, kinda crazy just how prevalent Huntress Wizard is in this series, despite only barely getting a single cameo in her original form. Definitely not complaining though, she was always a cool character who went super underused in the original show. I love the atmosphere of this forest area. The colors are very vibrant and the music is so serene. Fionna blowing on the dandelion is a pretty funny scene that gets some good payoff in the final episode. The final character we meet in this episode is LSP, the human version of Take a Wild Guess. Yeah, he's basically just straight up a human version of LSP, and I think that's really funny. Like, pretty much every other character takes some amount of creative liberties, but for LSP, they basically just plopped her into Fiona's world. His scene with Fionna is definitely the funniest part of the episode. I love how, even though he fails to help Cake, he actually does get Fionna to open up a little bit about her problems. After this point, Cake jumps into a magic portal, and the episode ends off on this cliffhanger. Overall, Fionna Campbell was a really strong start to the miniseries. It's definitely not the most exciting episode, since it mostly just exists to set up Fionna's arc and make us care about the world she lives in. But I think it does everything it needs to do very well. The episode keeps up a very quick pace, having Fionna jump from character to character, but each scene is given enough room to breathe. It's definitely fun pointing out all the character cameos while watching the episode. And it made me care about Fionna herself, a character I barely ever thought about in the original show. It's a very strong introductory episode and made me excited for what's to come. That's 1 down, 9 more to go, so stay tuned for next time when I discuss the episode titled after the real main character of Fionna and Cake. Squill out.